could stand and say the pledge. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, especially some of the youngest people I've ever seen come to our meeting. Little baby carrier, so thank you for coming. We have no visitors wishing to speak and no written communication. We do have a committee report, though.
Yes, the Alternative Funding Committee met today to review the final numbers from the Show Us Your Stripes event from last year. We got the last of the bills in and made a profit, so we've got some grant money available to be spent. We also reviewed one grant that was submitted, and we approved that. And we will be meeting again in probably later January, early February to start planning the next Stripes.
Okay, great, thank you. Do we have any other committee meetings? No? Okay. Then we will turn it over to you, Mr. Cohen.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm very excited to welcome Mr. Lewis, Mr. Crozier, and several Smallwood faculty, staff, and students to the board meeting tonight to give us what is our first strategic planning update, specifically focused on the Smallwood Building Action Plan. And of course, the board has seen the plan in its entirety during our retreat. So tonight they were given the task of highlighting some of the programs that I guess I would say they are the most proud of and have made the most progress of to this point. So welcome, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for providing us with this opportunity to share with you this evening. Knowing that we presented you with a fairly detailed overview at your board retreat in October, we are so excited to have this opportunity to make our plan come alive for all of you and for the Amherst community tonight. Our deep collaboration as a learning community began in the summer of 2016 with a half-day retreat that was attended by many of our educators who gave of their time based on their passion and their commitment to our school. The outgrowth of this retreat was instrumental in perfectly laying the foundation and creating the conditions for the successful development of the Smallwood Drive School Strategic Action Plan. We did that this past summer, and we opened the school year by hosting meetings for all of our various stakeholder groups and providing them with the opportunity to seek clarity and to provide helpful input into the development of our plan. We're pleased that our plan fully aligns and supports the district's priorities of learning and achievement, student life, and Amherst pride. In order for our plan to be successful, it's imperative that we create multiple and well-planned touch points throughout the entire school year for all of our stakeholder groups. Doing so allows us the opportunity to stay connected with our plan in meaningful and in personal ways. And this ongoing interaction with our plan also helps to ensure that we have maximum goal attainment. At the end of the year, we want to make sure we did what we said we were going to do and that we achieved it with great success. We're fortunate that at Smallwood Drive School, we have so many teacher leaders who strive to make our school one of excellence in so many different ways every single day. And tonight you're going to hear from some of those dedicated leaders about their respective roles, not only in the development, but in the implementation of our action plan. And so with that being said, I am pleased to now introduce Mrs. Higgins, who teaches health, wellness, and physical education at Smallwood Drive School. Thank you.
Thanks. So it's been a privilege for me to be part of the both district level and the Smallwood Drive strategic planning team. We followed the district's lead and we clarified our mission and our vision for Smallwood. Even for a seasoned teacher like me who's been around the block quite a few times here, it's been really exciting, it's been really rewarding. It can rejuvenate, this whole process has really rejuvenated my feelings about the profession and our building. Most importantly, we've had a really open communication process. All the stakeholders have had some input, whether you were on our strategic planning team or not. On one of our opening days of school, we completed a museum walk. All of our priorities and our action steps were hung up in the gymnasium. Everybody was allowed to make comments, questions, list concerns, and then all of those, I think there were 60 of them to be exact, were addressed at a follow-up meeting. And this has really drawn us together. as a faculty, a staff, whether you're a teacher, a student, a custodian, no matter where you work in the building, the transparency of the process and the open communication has really brought the building together. Everybody's on board. We all feel like we have ownership of the program. So I'm excited to introduce Mr. Crozier, who will start talking about some of those initiatives.
Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. Our Smallwood Strategic Building Plan has over a dozen initiatives for the 2017-18 school year. This evening, we are happy to highlight the progress of 3. STEAM opportunities, professional development, and our new PAWS behavior program. Let's start with STEAM. Smallwood is committed to implementing progressive technology curriculum, resources, and tools to enhance teaching and learning. In addition, our school is also committed to creating partnerships with community resources such as the University at Buffalo. With the support of Dr. Scott Worsinger, Smallwood parent and science professor at UB, Smallwood has implemented STEAM Club. Meeting Thursdays after school with some of our 3rd grade students, examining human hearts, breaking down complex engines, and launching rockets are just a few of the activities that have taken place in the club. In addition, and in the true spirit of collaboration, we are pleased to share that after a very successful spring semester at Smallwood, STEAM Club has expanded to Windermere this fall so that students in both elementary buildings can learn and grow thanks to the partnership of Dr. Worsinger and the University at Buffalo. It is my pleasure to now introduce enrichment teacher, Mrs. DiGiacomo, and library media specialist, Mrs. Unger, who will present on STEAM Mondays at Smallwood.
We are here tonight to explain a very exciting and new program that happens on Mondays at Smallwood. It's called STEAM Mondays, and all grade levels participate. STEAM stands for science, technology, engineering, art, and math. This initiative supports the district's strategic action plan in the area of learning and achievement and results from our building plan, which calls for every Smallwood student to have STEAM opportunities throughout the year.
Each grade level team rotates through their assigned day 4 times throughout the year.
Our intermediate students will be taught how to code. Coding is a 21st century skill that is widely used in technology and allows the students to be engaged, creative, and develop problem-solving skills. The students participate in a program called Scratch that was designed by Harvard graduate students and allows them to create their own videos, games, and activities using coding commands. Ethan Porto, a 4th grade student, will demonstrate how he has used Scratch in this short video.
Ethan Porto, and I'm a 4th grader at Smallwood Drive School. Today I'm going to show you how to use a program called Scratch. So first, if you want to, you can pick a sprite. It will start out as a cat, but if you want to pick a different one, you click on one of these. Then if you want to add a background, you go down to the bottom left corner and you go to, it will say choose backdrop from library. Pick whichever one you want. Then you can go to sound. If you want to add a sound, you go to sound library. You pick which one you want. You can click the play button to see how it sounds. Or you can just record your sound. And this is my program that I created by myself.
For our kindergarten through 2nd grade students, we selected Rockin' Blocks. And Rockin' Blocks STEAM education provides deep, project-based learning for all students. This program has rock blocks which are designed to engage students' minds, visual and fine motor skills, as well as boost an understanding of STEAM. Through this program, Smallwood's young engineers will be confident in their ability to think through a challenge, follow visual instruction with multiple steps, and express concepts of spatial and quantitative relations.
Our kindergarten students, Kennedy Raganay, Matthew Zumsky,
and Libby Maxwell will demonstrate how to use design sheets to build different objects using the rock blocks and a design mat.
Hi, my name is Kylie D. I'm from Mrs. Derwin's class. Hi, my name is Matthew. I'm from Mrs. Chanel's class. Hi, my name is Libby. I'm from Mrs. Derwin's class. We're going to use a design sheet to help us build. Watch us build. I made a caterpillar. I made a camera. I made a tractor.
The students have been very excited to be part of STEAM Monday and have been actively engaged as they design and create in both programs. I would now like to introduce Mrs. Chinelli, our kindergarten teacher, and Mrs. Brinkworth, who teaches third grade at Smallwood.
Throughout the school year, we have several professional development opportunities. Today, we'll just be showcasing one and connecting it to our work in the classroom. Our professional development calls for best practice and aligns with the learning and achievement pillar on the strategic plan. As part of our strategic plan, we are receiving high-quality professional development. This year, we are pleased to continue our work with Dr. Lynn Shanahan from the University at Buffalo. Dr. Shanahan's professional development is based on current research and best practice. We began the school year discussing skills versus strategies and the differences between the two. Our students will know when to use the skills and strategies to become strategic readers. All kindergarten through fifth grade teachers had rich discussions, so we have common language within the building. With Dr. Shanahan's expertise, we also focused on balanced literacy. The components include read aloud, shared reading, guided reading, independent reading, modeled writing, interactive writing, guided writing, independent writing, and word study. We looked closely at each of these and how they're related to help scaffold our literacy instruction.
Additionally, we've been working with Dr. Shanahan on a district-wide word study initiative. We worked collaboratively to create a staircase of word study skills and vocabulary with vertical alignment across the grade levels. Again, reinforcing that common language among teachers and students. And this definitely helps to ensure that as a building, we're all rowing in the same direction. And another exciting opportunity we had with Dr. Shanahan this year was the ability to differentiate our learning based upon the needs of our grade level teams. So, for example, some of the teachers have decided to have Dr. Shanahan teach a lesson in our classroom, and then the teachers would observe Dr. Shanahan, and then after the lesson was over, they would come together for a discussion regarding the observations that they saw. Another team decided to do the opposite. A teacher volunteered to do the teaching while her colleagues are observing, as well as Dr. Shanahan. And then again, after the lesson is over, they're going to go back and have another one of those meaningful discussions with Dr. Shanahan about what they were observing in the classroom. And one thing is always certain, whenever we leave our trainings with Dr. Shanahan, we always leave knowing that it's something we can use in our classrooms right away, and it helps to really get our students ready to become strategic readers and writers. And now I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Milliman and Dr. Marietta.
Well, have you heard about Smallwood? Friends, have we heard about Smallwood? What do we know about Smallwood?
Smallwood School is great.
You know that, and you know what else is great? Star Wars is great. And you know, in Star Wars, in the first movie, I'm not talking about those prequels, I'm talking about that first movie, Luke does a needs assessment. He realizes he needs to learn the Force, and to do that, he needs an Obi-Wan. Well, in 2016, Smallwood underwent a needs assessment, and we determined we needed something too, but not an Obi-Wan. We needed a Meichenbaum. So we got Dr. David Meichenbaum, an expert in behavioral intervention, not only at an individual level, to a classroom level, to really an institutional level of behavioral intervention to help us with that. And, so to tell you more about what came from our work with Dr. Meichenbaum, I'm going to turn it over to our very own. She's a mix of Princess Leia, Amidala, and Rey all in one. Dr. Rob.
Thank you, my Jedi friend. So, as part of our work with Dr. Meichenbaum, we also formed a behavior focus group, and we know all Jedis need a group that focuses on things. The group was divided into 3 committees that were led by Mr. Crozier, Mr. Lewis, and myself. As part of our work, we continued working with Dr. Meichenbaum, but we also developed some goals. So we surveyed our staff, and we found that while there was a lot of common language, we wanted to make sure that we kind of narrowed it down. So we had 2 goals. We wanted consistency with our behavior management, and we wanted common language among our teachers. So we arrived upon the end result, which was positive behavior intervention supports within our schools. You'll hear it referred to as PBIS. We came up with the acronym of PAWS, and you'll see all of us adorned in our shirts. PAWS just stands for practicing being a friend, always being respectful, working to learn and grow, and then safety first. All of our students, I would guarantee, know it. We've had a lot to do with our strategic plan. We've been able to use that strategic plan as a launching pad, really, to develop our implementation plan. So we've been really fortunate because as part of that student life component, our rollout has allowed us to really collaborate with families to develop this. We were so fortunate because our PTA generously gave us shirts when we just came up with this pipe dream, and then they were like, let's do it. So all of our students were able to get shirts. Our teachers came up with model lessons. They presented to the teachers so that teachers would be teaching all the students about this within the first weeks of school. Mr. Crozier and Mr. Lewis led an assembly where students were again reinforced that same message. There were pep rallies. We had tie-ins with community time. We updated our student handbook. It went home to all families. We had newsletters, letters that went home to families. Live announcements, which were connected to our character education, happen every Friday, where Mr. Crozier and Mrs. Noe have delighted us with their talk show. We've also had the opportunity to have ongoing assemblies throughout the year, so we're reinforcing it constantly. There's a chant, there's a song, there's a lot that we've been doing. There was cheerleaders that came and actually came up with a cheer. And there's been ongoing professional development. And one of the things that's really exciting is our students get reinforced regularly. So students, we all have the same common language. If we see any of the students practicing any of our code, and it encompasses both value code and rules, so we were able to kind of combine the philosophies within the school. Any teacher can give a child a paw, and then all of our classroom teachers develop their own goal. So they might come up with 25 paws, and then they earn a classroom award. We've had actually 95 celebrations to date where Mr. Crozier and Mr. Lewis have come into classrooms. They've had everything from crazy hat, crazy hair days, and cupcake parties, brownie parties, so there's been all different types of things. But rather than talking about it, I thought it would be fun for you guys to see how it's been embraced within our school, and also so you can see and understand why Smallwood is truly great.
I'm Madeline Camerata. I'm Gage Chopin, and we're from Mrs. Bartlett's class. Smallwood Schools proudly presents PAWS.
We can stand and say the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody, for coming, especially some of the youngest people I've ever seen come to our meeting. And little baby carrier, so thank you for coming. We have no visitors wishing to speak and no written communication. We do have a committee report, though.
Yes, the Alternative Funding Committee met today to review the final numbers from the the Show Us Your Stripes event from last year. We got the last of the bills in and made a profit, so we've got some grant money available to be spent. We also reviewed one grant that was submitted, and we approved that. And we will be meeting again in probably later January, early February to start planning the next Stripes.
Okay, great, thank you. Do we have any other committee meetings? No? Okay. Then we will turn it over to you, Mr. Crowe.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm very excited to welcome Mr. Lewis, Mr. Crozier, and several Smallwood faculty, staff, and students to the board meeting tonight to give us what is our first strategic planning update, specifically focused on the Smallwood Building Action Plan. And of course, the board has seen the plan in its entirety during our retreat. So tonight they were given the task of highlighting some of the programs that I guess I would say they are the most proud of and have made the most progress of to this point. So welcome, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you so much. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for providing us with this opportunity to share with you this evening. Knowing that we presented you with a fairly detailed overview at your board retreat in October, we are so excited to have this opportunity to make our plan come alive for all of you and for the Amherst community tonight. Our deep collaboration as a learning community began in the summer of 2016 with a half-day retreat that was attended by many of our educators who gave of their time based on their passion and their commitment to our school. The outgrowth of this retreat was instrumental in perfectly laying the foundation and creating the conditions for the successful development of the Smallwood Drive School Strategic Action Plan. We did that this past summer, and we opened the school year by hosting meetings for all of our various stakeholder groups and providing them with the opportunity to seek clarity and to provide helpful input into the development of our plan. We're pleased that our plan fully aligns and supports the district's priorities of learning and achievement, student life, and Amherst pride. In order for our plan to be successful, it's imperative that we create multiple and well-planned touch points throughout the entire school year for all of our stakeholder groups. Doing so allows us the opportunity to stay connected with our plan in meaningful and in personal ways. And this ongoing interaction with our plan also helps to ensure that we have maximum goal attainment. At the end of the year, we want to make sure we did what we said we were going to do and that we achieved it with great success. We're fortunate that at Smallwood Drive School, we have so many teacher leaders who strive to make our school one of excellence in so many different ways every single day. And tonight you're going to hear from some of those dedicated leaders about their respective roles, not only in the development, but in the implementation of our action plan. And so with that being said, I'm pleased to now introduce Mrs. Higgins, who teaches health. I was very pleased with that return. And here are their responses. 57 had said yes, they were, with 0 no responses. The next question that was asked is, do you have a good and basic understanding of our plan? I was thrilled that 100% yes response on that question as well. The next question is, do you feel that input from our faculty was taken into consideration by our planning team in developing and finalizing our plan? Again, 57 yes responses and 0 no responses. The next question that they were asked was, do you feel that any questions that have been generated about our plan have been responded to? You guessed it, 100% yes response. Next question is, do you feel connected to our plan? Really important question. I'm happy to say that we had 57 out of 57 yes responses. Next question is, do you feel that our plan provides us with a clear roadmap of where we are heading? Again, we had 100% affirmative response. And the very last question, and really important because once we have a plan that's developed, we want to make sure that we have everyone behind our plan, supporting it and bringing it to fruition. And again, that we accomplish everything that we set out to accomplish as the plan was developed and implemented. So the question was, are you willing to fully support our plan? And again, I'm thrilled that 100% of our survey respondents said yes, that they were willing to support our action plan. Very pleased with those results. Thanks, Bergen.
Well, ladies, gentlemen of the board, I mentioned earlier that we have 3 highlights. I actually have a 4th highlight for you tonight. We have our very own stormtroopers here from Smallwood School. Please welcome second grade students from Mrs. Kujawinski and Mrs. Tackett's classroom here to sing our Pause song.
Pause up and raise your voice. Pause up and make your choice. Pause up and raise your voice. Smallwood School is great. Practicing a friend. Hand in hand we go to the end. Be respectful to all you know. Work together to learn and grow. Safety first, we're on a roll. Smallwood School is great. Pause up and raise your voice. Pause up and make your choice. Pause up and raise your voice. Smallwood School is great.
Boys and girls, excellent job. Thank you so much for helping make our presentation so special tonight and for coming on a school night, right? We appreciate that. Really well done. This is what it's all about, ladies and gentlemen of our school board. This is why we do what we do every single day. So again, thank you, boys and girls. A special thank you to our teachers, and as always, we couldn't do what we do at the school building without the support of our school board. So that never goes underappreciated. It's always recognized. And a sincere thank you from all of us at Smallwood for that constant support that we feel from all of you. That's it for our presentation. Of course, I would like to open things up in case there are any questions from any of the board members.
I'm sure there's going to be some questions. I'd like to thank our students as they leave for being here, and if it's okay with their parents, I'd like to offer them just a little holiday treat for such a job well done. So thank you very much. Thank you. Go ahead. Welcome always. Good job. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you. Here you go.
Nice job,
Nice job. Thank you. Good job. Thank you for being here.
And
I'm
parents.
very proud of you. Nice work. Thank you. Thank you. Happy holidays. Thank you. Thanks. Oh, of course, our teachers. If there's any questions from the board, please.
I did have a question. First of all, thank you all for being here. It's great to hear from the staff and, the faculty members. It's really a nice, we listen to these guys all the time, so it's nice to have you guys too. I wanted to ask, you mentioned that there have been 95 parties as a result of the paused actions being taken. What other types of measurement are you using to see what success looks like, and what other results have you seen so far?
Sure, I'll start and then anyone else can jump in. We keep track of behavioral referrals to the office, so I don't have that number committed to share with you this evening, but Mr. Crozier and I can attest there's been a marked decrease. I would say generally speaking, we don't have serious behavior problems in our building at all. But every now and then, it is important for a child to come and see either one of us. And we use those as learning opportunities as we interact with those students and talk to them about choices that they make and help guide them to maybe better choices if they're faced with the same or similar situation moving forward. And I can tell you, probably to date, less than 10 referrals, which is pretty significant from September to almost winter recess.
Do you have like a comparison to last year, or what it looked like last year compared to this year?
We do. We have all of that data. Like I said, I don't have it memorized, but significantly decreased.
That's great.
Yeah.
Stu Lewis and I have also used pause as just an opportunity to continue to reinforce. As Dr. Otto mentioned, we were looking for common language and consistency. For example, we did a survey to the teachers and asked them about their own classroom rules. We had 25 different rules that talked about respect. Respect is very important at Smallwood. So this creation of PAWS allowed all of us, including the administration. So when a student is sent down for not following Smallwood behavior, it really gives Mr. Lewis and I an opportunity to reinforce what our expectations are throughout the building in all areas.
I'd like to add, I've been at Smallwood for a long time, and this last week we had our holiday concert, and throughout the program they changed from the orchestra to the band to the chorus, and it was remarkably quiet when they were transitioning from one to the other, that everyone was kind of looking around going, wow, what an improvement. So it was very apparent with no one saying anything in between when the kids were changing.
Yeah, and I can just add anecdotally, speaking kind of to Rich's point, our goals were really, like you said, that consistency, making sure that we had the common language. And I honestly think if you asked any child in our building, they would be able to tell you all of them. And I can't say that is true with other initiatives always. You know, a lot of times we think we're reinforcing it, but then kids aren't even sure what it is. And I think all of our kids know, all of our teachers know. Many of our teachers could even probably sing the whole song, even the second refrain. So that's, you know, just another piece.
Do you see kids in the classroom hallways kind of reminding and reinforcing with each other? I don't want to use the word confront, but saying...
Oh, sure. And if we want attention, like I do hall monitoring in the morning. So if I want their attention and I go pause up, everybody's silent. Everybody puts their hands up, everybody's silent, and I can get
But are you seeing the kid yet where one child will say to another child, that's not consistent with, they wouldn't use those words, it's probably too adult, but...
Pause in the hallway.
Yeah, I push into 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, and we do a Steps to Respect program. And they'll make connections even to that, where they'll tell me, well, that's not practicing being a friend. So I definitely hear the students using the language in context, connecting it to their actual behaviors.
That's what I was going to ask, a diminishment of clicks, lower clicks, you see less of that because of this?
You'll still see it to some degree, but I think it's easier to intervene with the common language and for us to be able to all say, you know, unilateral, it doesn't matter who was observing that behavior, we could all go up to someone, is that practicing being a friend? Remember, we're trying to make sure that we include others, we're sharing, because we've defined each of those things as well.
I think also it's when they earn the pause, at the end of the week, many classrooms review, like, why did you earn that paw? And they put it up on the board in our classroom. So they give us their specific example of how they earned that paw. So, that's nice.
Very cool.
That's great. Well, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you again for allowing us this opportunity.
Can we use that in the high school?
Mr. Pidgeot, give me a call tomorrow.
Right. We got a t-shirt. We got a t-shirt for you.
I just wanted to say, I know how much you care, and I know how hard you work, and thank you. Good job. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what you're doing on behalf of kids. It makes a huge difference. Great job.
Thanks for taking your personal time to come out here too.
Thanks to the guitar
I was hoping that you were producing the scat song.
Anytime you want, Mr. Command performance, I'll be back.
Michelle, I'll show you.
Yes, thank you. Take care.
You're welcome.
So I'm not sure how to transition from that to our first 3-year budget forecast, but I think
Poor Ms. Pudzisi's got to follow that.
I think
No,
maybe
how am I supposed to meet that level of entertainment?
maybe a good way would be to point out that, you know, having a balanced budget allows us to offer programming like we just saw in our schools. And while the first draft of our budget presents a little bit of an ominous picture, those of you know that have been on the board and that have been through this process, you know, it's like looking at a fuzzy picture at this time of year, and it continues to come into focus. And by April, you know, our budget will be balanced, and we know we'll have something to put forward to the voters in May. Right now, what you're looking at is our most conservative estimates of expenditures, as well as our most conservative estimates with revenues. So you can imagine what that does in the end. And Mrs. Bazinski is here to talk about that a little bit with us.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, Mr. Piniella is exactly right in that this presentation is our starting point. It is very conservative. 90% of the numbers that we use in this presentation are estimates. So we have lots of work to do in the ensuing months, and we look forward to it, but this is just the first step in getting us started. I also want to point out before we get started that when we look at the charts, you'll see some negative percent changes and some double-digit increases. A lot of that is because we're using this transition to realign some of our expenditures and our revenues to be more close to our actual expenditures and revenues, and moving some funds in different lines to try to eliminate some of the budget transfers that we see, early in the year and throughout the year. So we've taken that into account, which also causes some different percentage changes this year, but then that'll smooth out over the next couple of years as we continue that process. All right. So first we'll start with our overview. We're going to talk about our revenue assumptions and projections, so all of the funds that come into the district that we use for all of our programming, and then the same thing on the expenditure side, what we plan to spend those funds on. Our overall budget forecast, so we'll look at the revenue to expenditure comparisons for the 18-19 school year and do some very conservative projections over the next 2 years. We'll do a summary of that and then answer any questions that you may have. So our revenue assumptions. Property tax levy. Our property tax levy is estimated based on an estimated tax cap calculation. There are many factors that go into our tax cap calculation, and at this point we only know one of them, that our tax base growth factor is 1.0057. CPI is not finalized yet, so we used a projected CPI of 1.9%. We're thinking it's going to be close to 2, but to be conservative, we went a little below that. The tax cap calculation is due to the State Comptroller's Office by March 1st. So we'll have update in our February presentation to get a better idea of what that's going to look like.
And the highest the CPI could go is 2. So when they do refer to the 2% tax cap, that's actually what they're referring to as the CPI that can be used in the formula to determine the levy. Mrs. Bazinski analyzed 2 models, a 12-month model of CPI increases and then a year-long model. And one of them came out to be like 1.92 and the other one was about 2.017. So conservatively, we picked 1.9 for this presentation, hoping we'll land at the maximum 2%. I don't think it's been there since the second year of the tax cap, which was several years ago.
Correct. Our capital exclusion is an amount that we are authorized by law to add to our tax cap, and it is the difference between our debt payments for the year and the anticipated building need that we'll be bringing in. So it's the difference. We're allowed to add that to our tax levy because those expenditures were authorized by the voters when the projects were approved. Again, those are estimates, and we will have updated numbers when the output reports from the state are updated and we receive our state aid runs. The governor's state aid runs should be out mid-January, so that'll be our first estimate, and that's what we will use for our tax cap calculation because the final legislative numbers won't be out until after the tax cap calc is due. Our state aid numbers. We estimated a 1% increase over 17-18, and those are output reports that were released in December, just a couple weeks ago. But we also made an adjustment to our BOCES aid. If you remember last year during budget, there was a discrepancy between our estimate for BOCES aid and our state aid runs. So to be conservative, the district used the lower number and appropriated fund balance for the difference. Well, on our December state aid runs, we finally have the confirmation that the state aid number is higher. We were expecting it to be about 1.2 million, and based on last year's expenditures, it's actually 1.5 million. So in next year's revenue projection, we assumed a BOCES aid of 1.2 million, which is more in line with what our expenditures will be this year. BOCES aid is one of those expense-driven aids, which means the amount you get the following year is based on your expenses from the prior year. Our miscellaneous revenues include just that, a bunch of miscellaneous items, including community ed, our after-school program, interest and earnings. So we adjusted 17-18 to be more reflective of our actual revenues, and then did modest increases of 2.5% to 3% for the outgoing years. We also have on our revenue side transfers. And transfers are the use of funds from an interfund transfer or the use of our reserves. So last year we had $742,000 that we budgeted as an interfund transfer from our capital fund, as well as $100,000 that we budgeted from a reserve. This year we're projecting the use of our tax tertiary reserve. We have a $20,000 line in our budget on the expenditure side every year, and those expenses close to our tax reserve at the end of the year. So it makes sense to account for that expenditure with an interfund transfer, because in the end, that's where those expenses will be paid from. An appropriated fund balance. Last year, we added a contingency line of $500,000 on the appropriation side, our expenditure side, to account for any unknown expenses that may come up throughout the year that we couldn't have planned for. Health insurance costs being above anticipated, special education costs being higher than normal. And in order to not impact the taxpayers for that contingency line, we also appropriated $500,000 worth of fund balance. So those two lines offset each other so that it didn't increase the tax levy unnecessarily. We've continued that practice in this presentation for next year. So let's look at our chart. So our revenue projections will demonstrate our 17-18 adopted budget, which matches what the voters authorized this past May, $57,303,000, and what we project our revenues to be for next year. So our property tax levy, we estimate the cap to be about 2.4%, which takes our levy up to $35,766,798, with $539,000 of capital exclusion included. Again, please remember those are estimates. Our state aid shows an adjustment of 3.14%, a decrease in building aid of a few $100,000, which shows as a negative 2%, but then an increase in state aid of 4.7%. We're not truly projecting an increase in state aid of 4%. We projected a 1% increase, but the 4% comes in from that BOCES aid that we didn't budget last year that now we are accounting for next year. Miscellaneous revenues have several categories. Our pilots are payments in lieu of taxes, and those are commercial properties that are not on the tax rolls, and they pay their taxes to us directly. We do have a new pilot coming on the books for next year, but again, that number is estimated because we don't know our tax rate yet. County sales tax is the portion of sales tax revenue that Erie County pays to our district specifically, and we projected a 2.5% increase in that revenue. Our community education line has a negative 15% change. It's not because we are changing any programs or cutting anything. We're just booking the revenue to be a little bit more reflective of what we're actually bringing in every year. So it shows as a reduction in revenue, but we weren't truly bringing that much in those programs in the current year. Interest and penalty earnings are interest on the funds we have in our bank accounts and in our reserves, as well as interest and penalties for our tax collection process. And then our other revenues are miscellaneous revenues, building use, Medicaid, and we do see a significant increase in that category of about $200,000, and that's in our Medicaid revenue. So the special education department has been working very hard to make sure that all of our students and our expenses are properly documented, and we receive Medicaid aid for a lot of those services. Transfers shows a significant decrease, and that is the difference between the $740,000 that we had booked coming over from our capital fund last year that we are not bringing over this year. And actually, we didn't end up using it as a revenue in the 17-18 year because we used those funds to offset to reduce our borrowing in June. We went out for a large bond, and we used that $700,000 to apply to the bond to lower the amount we needed to borrow, which then reduced our payments in the future and reduced our interest payments. But it does include the $20,000 for the tax cert reserve, and that again is a line that we will look at throughout the budget development process to determine if there are any other areas that we want to fund through that line, if there are any other reserves we want to use. Appropriated fund balance is the amount of existing fund balance that we can use to support our budget. Last year it was $929,000, which was $500 for the contingency line, and $429,000 for the difference in the BOCES aid. We didn't want to increase our tax levy in case we actually did get the aid, so we used the fund balance knowing that if the aid didn't come in the way we expected it to, we wouldn't need to use that. And indeed, it did come in and actually in excess of a couple $100,000. So overall, our revenues for next year are projected to stay quite flat with just over a 0.5% increase. But that's a combination of a lot of different things, with our tax levy going up slightly, but also seeing some reduction in building aid and a reduction in the appropriated fund balance. So we will keep the $500,000 in for this year, which offsets our contingency line. So again, we want to make sure that that contingency line is not impacting the taxpayers, but because we have such a difference there, it does bring our revenues down a little bit. Okay. So we'll move on to our expenditure assumptions. Again, lots of estimates. In personnel, we do have 5 contracts open. So we had several factors going into our projections for our personnel. Minimum wage is a mandated increase that has an impact on our expenditures. The open collective bargaining agreements, those are estimates on where we will land with those. But we did roll some of the closed contracts forward and did projections for salaries for next year, and then assumed a 3.75 increase in expenditures for the 2 following years. The benefits side of our expenditures also increased. ERS is projected to stay quite stable. It's 15.3% this year. Might even decrease a little bit, so we projected a 15.1% increase in this presentation. TRS is projected to actually increase 1.2% from 9.8 to 11. The final rates on either of those are not yet known, so those are just estimates. Health insurance is expected to increase. Our overall expenditures are trending at 8% increase. So that was an increase in next year's budget over where we are this year. And for workers' compensation, we haven't received those rates yet, but we should have them by our next presentation. General support, these are our budget codes that support our programming. We didn't book any increases to these lines. We are expecting to continue our capital outlay project for each year, but because this is a program continuation budget, try to keep our expenditures flat where we can. So we either rolled over the same amounts that we had this year, or if there was a contractual increase, it ended up being offset by some of those budget transfers I talked about, which is why it shows a 0%. It will show a 0% for this year. On the instruction side, we show a 14% increase, but again, those are some of those budget transfers. We didn't make any major changes to our expenditure on the program side either. For BOCES, we have our participation meeting in January that has been scheduled, and that's where we go line by line through all of our BOCE services, and we'll have a more accurate estimate of what our BOCES expenditures will be next year. But we did assume a 2% increase for next year and each of the years after. All of these numbers will be updated in our February presentation. Transportation, we are in the middle of a 5-year contract with First Student. Our contract increase is 1.5%, but we had some other lines in our transportation codes that we weren't utilizing. So with those being reduced, it was just under 1% that our transportation expenses are increasing for next year. Debt service shows a significant decrease of 13%, and that's due to the lower borrowing amount for our bond, as well as some excellent interest rates that we received on the 2 bonds we closed on in the last few months. In addition, we received over $200,000 in premiums, and we were able to apply those premiums to our interest payment for this 18-19 school year, which then reduced that expense even further. And again, we continued our $500,000 contingency line offset by fund balance to help us prepare or be prepared for unknown expenditures without impacting our taxpayers. So our expenditure projection chart shows an overall increase of 4.43% in expenses. Personnel increasing less than 4%. Benefits is one of the larger increases at just over 12%. The majority of those increases are health insurance and TRS contributions. Instruction and BOCES increased slightly. Transportation is 1%. Debt service is reduced as we had discussed. And the contingency line stays the same and doesn't increase.
Again, what you'll see in the major increase there in instruction, as well as some of the other areas, the decrease in debt service explained. It's not that we're increasing our expenditures in instruction. Mrs. Bazinski's really looking at our actual expenditures and how things have been coded over the past few years, including this year, the transfers that she's had to make to different lines, and trying to fix the structure of our budget within our financial system, WinCap. What I will say about the increase to benefits is we're currently trending over budget for our healthcare expenditures due to some high cost claimants. And at this point, they have readjusted our trend for the current year at about 7%. And then they're applying an 8% trend on top of the 7% escalation for the current year. So there's about $1 million increase to what is budgeted from year to year reflected in health insurance. But we had a very positive meeting yesterday with our consultants from Premier, and we believe that we will see some positive movement with that. But at this point, as I mentioned, it's the most conservative estimate, we believe, just to make sure that we're being fiscally responsible and we're not underestimating, because that's one of those areas where you can have some unplanned expenditures. So there was about 7 high-cost claimants that we analyzed, and we believe 5 of those 7 are trending in the positive direction. So we're expecting to see, as we go into the new year, some movement back towards what we budgeted for the current year. But that's something we'll need to monitor.
So our overall budget forecast, looking at the revenues and the expenditures, show a $2.1 million gap for the 18-19 school year. That includes the $500,000 appropriated fund balance to offset the contingency. Again, we have a lot of work to do over the next few months. We will have many updates on both the revenue and the expenditure side. So we anticipate the February budget update having many more answers than we have to share with you for today. So in summary, our revenues are projected to stay somewhat flat, increasing by less than 1%. And we will have updated projections after the state aid runs are released in mid-January. Our expenditures are projected to increase by 4.4%. A large part of that are health insurance claims, increases to TRS contribution rates, and our contractual obligations for our personnel contracts. Our overall budget does demonstrate a $2.1 million gap, but it does use $500,000 in fund balance to offset that contingency line. And there are some areas that we will be looking at over the next few months to close that gap. We'll be looking hopefully for an increase in state aid from what we have projected. Any salary breakage from retirements, we have one that is currently applied as her retirement was accepted by the board already. But any remaining retirements we don't know of yet, so those aren't included here. Spending reductions, Mr. Pinella has meetings scheduled with every administrator and department head to look at program and see and just take a close look at all of our expenditures. We have the option to increase our fund balance allocation, and those will be future discussions that we'll have. Again, you have the ability to increase your tax levy. We'll have final numbers for the next update. Then the board has to make the decision at what level they actually want the levy to be. And then we have the discussions of any additional funds that we may want to appropriate out of our reserves.
If you think about last year, I'm not sure if you recall our final budget presentation in April, but it did account for approximately a $1.5 million gap in the current year, I'm sorry, in 18-19. And as a result, what we've seen is the increase in state aid that we got from the BOCES, expenditure-driven aid, was kind of offset by the increase in expenditures that we've seen in healthcare. So while we had the positive movement of about $800,000 with the aid estimate for BOCES, maybe a little bit less, $500,000, it's offset by what is estimated to be $1 million increase in healthcare expenditures. And that is one of the things that you face when you are a self-funded healthcare organization, as we are, which is why last year we talked about putting that $500,000 appropriation in there for what I call max loss, unplanned expenditures. We've also had some other conversations about how we might be able to create a reserve against our expenditures that will allow us to smooth some of the increases in future years. So, very productive conversation as recent as yesterday regarding that, even though what we have projected here is kind of an ominous picture.
What happens with community education line? It goes down.
The community education line decreases based on the before and after school program. So we have revenues booked for both the Smallwood program and the Windermere program. So an example, in this year's budget, Smallwood was booked at bringing in $225,000 in revenue. They really bring in closer to like 180, 190. So we just lowered those revenues to be a little more closer to accurate. And that was for both buildings. So the program isn't changing. We're not decreasing it. We're not cutting from it on either the revenue or the expenditure side. We're just bringing those revenues down to be a little bit more reflective of actuals.
And you were talking about transfers in the instructional, but you didn't specify what the transfers were.
Those are the budget transfers that we have been submitting to the board for the last couple months. I think I've sent at least 3 that were over $500,000. So we have the funds available in one line, but we're not using it in that line, and we really need it in a different line. So the money's moved from a general support account budget code into a program budget code. So those major swings are just correcting those for next year so that we won't need as many of those budget transfers.
And many of them, if I recall in my conversations, in my brief time in this capacity, working with Mrs. Conley, revolve around special education. So the past practice has been to kind of go dollar to dollar in the special education line, and then as CSE meetings unfold after the budget's adopted in the spring and even in the summer and placements are made, they would transfer the money over to the line where we needed to expend it out of. But the overall budgeting was accounted for. It just wasn't necessarily in the code that we expended out of. So from an auditing perspective, you want to make sure your expenditures are coded appropriately. What Mrs. Bazinski is saying is, I don't see necessarily the need to annually make all of these transfers every fall. If we have a history of making the expenditures out of these accounts, I'd like to structurally fix it in the first year, so moving forward, you won't see those. So it's really the impact of her analyzing both historic and current expenditures and transfers and making sure we're accounting for things in places where we're actually expending out of it. It doesn't mean that the past budgeting practices were inaccurate. It just meant that they were accounting for the money initially in the budget in a code that needed to be transferred.
So did some line item somewhere else go down then?
Mm-hmm. Like the general support line showed a 0% increase. There are contract services in there, there are utilities in there. Those lines will increase. But other lines decreased enough so that it ended up being 0, but then it pushed down into the program side, the instruction side.
The interest, that's just painful to watch.
I know, we actually...
Well, let me finish, if you don't mind. So the Fed's raised rates 4 times since last December. Can we put out an RFP or something like that for someone?
Well, we actually were contacted by our bank for M&T with some suggestions for different accounts that we might want to consider moving our tax money into until such time it's needed for cash flow purposes. Our banker, Ms. Finn, did meet with me and Ms. Williams, our treasurer, and we haven't quite moved on that yet. The program that was recommended did have a custodial fee of $3,000, and we just haven't fully analyzed that to see if that's really where we want to put the money. But we did talk with her about our interest rates and about increasing our interest rates, especially in our money market account. She was receptive to that idea, and now that the tax money is in, this is the time that we have a little bit more leverage to try to push those rates up. The decrease with the percentage-wise was quite high, but the dollar amount was less than $4,000. Not that that's not significant, but the percentage doesn't necessarily reflect the dollar amount. When you're looking at $57 million overall, the percentage for that one line, the dollar amount was a little bit less.
No, I get that. So no one else wants our money then?
I can't say whether or not they would want our money. That's where the majority of our accounts are. I mean, it's certainly something that we could look into.
We have, well, the other thing too is we're currently at a point where we're not holding a lot of capital project money. Would that affect that number as well?
It does.
Because we had at one point, a significant amount of money while capital construction was ongoing, and now we're at the point where we have about 1.3 million in the H fund from the reserve for the repair and the capital reserve that we transferred last year to get started on the 2016 project. But through phase 1, we're not going to be doing a lot of borrowing of that $29 million. But as we get into phase 2, we'll be taking out a lot more. So you might see gains that are a little bit more appropriate from past practice in the interest earnings. But it's certainly something that we have talked about in wanting to strengthen those partnerships that we've had and make it a little bit more reflective of the current market. So we are going to look into it.
Anyone else?
Do you have a song to end your presentation?
No, I'm feeling insufficient at the moment.
Well, thank you very much. As the board has seen in our budget calendar, in January, we will be working very diligently internally to put together some budget expenditure estimates, some reductions, some possible additions. We are also going to be keeping an eye on the governor's State of the State address and his first draft of the budget proposal in mid-January. And then when we come back in February, we'll have updated numbers, particularly on the revenue side. We'll ask you to declare your tax cap levy intentions for that March 1st deadline, and the picture will get a little bit clearer at that time. One item I'd like to mention, just for public note, I'll also be sending out something through our system to all of our parents. Next week, we're going to be launching an updated website. So it's as I've made the board aware in some of the communication we've had, our current provider, School World, it has been acquired by another provider, Blackboard. So we're upgrading our website to a new template. I think you'll find there's a lot of positive things about the new template, particularly the way it adapts to different size screens like mobile devices. It will also be a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more modern. You'll also see down the road that we hope to launch an app that goes along with it for our users on their phone. So it will be a little bit of a work in progress, but a lot of work has been done behind the scenes and continues over the next week in preparation for the launch by Mrs. Sosenko in our technology department, as well as Dr. Schoenfeld under his guidance. So next week, at some point, the switch will be flipped and you'll see a new website. I'll kind of send out that pardon our dust email to the community, letting them know that we're under construction and we're getting our new web interface launched. But we should be up and running successfully, and then we'll look to continue to refine it over the spring semester here. So that's all I have tonight for the superintendent's report. Thank you.
Okay. And we will need a motion for new business.
I will make a motion for new business. I make a motion for new business items F1, A through G, 2A through J, 3B, C, E, G, and H.
Okay, do we have a second?
I will second it.
Mr. Bob? Any discussion? All right. And all those in favor of new business items F1, A through G, F2, A through J, and 3B, C, E, G, and H, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Ms. Resser. Did I say that right?
It's Roser. But
Roser, well, I'm sorry about that. Welcome to our team. We look forward to working with you. I see you start mid-January, so.
Yeah, in a few weeks.
Fantastic. Well, welcome aboard.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. With that, we will need, do we have any follow-up action items, Mrs. Stone?
Did you want me to put looking into the interest rates as a follow-up action? Yes? Okay.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Okay. We will need a motion to convene to executive session.
I'll make a motion. Convene to executive session for negotiation with Cook Managers Association.
All right, do we have a second? All right, all those in favor of convening to executive session, please say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone, for coming.